The world doesn't end with a bang or a whimper. It ends with the sad, silent liquefaction of a pint of Ben, Jerry's fish food. I stared into the cardboard container, a soupy graveyard of chocolate, marshmallow, and tiny, defeated fudge fish, and I knew that civilization was officially on the brink. It was 98 degrees in the shade, and in our little slice of suburban paradise, Whispering Pines, there was no shade. There was only impeccably manicured sod, heat-storing asphalt, and the judgmental glare of the sun. The power had been out for 6 hours. 6 hours of my life I'd never get back. Each tick of the clock measured by another bead of sweat tracing a path down my temple. I was sprawled on the hardwood floor, which was now roughly the temperature of a well-done steak, wearing nothing but a pair of basketball shorts and a sheen of despair. My dog, a golden retriever named Buster who possessed all the survival instincts of a throw pillow, was lying next to me, panting in a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like, "Why did you buy a house with no trees?" "I don't know, Buster," I mumbled, answering his unspoken question. "I think the developer had a personal vendetta against chlorophyll." From the couch, a shape stirred. It was my wife, Sarah. My beautiful, wonderful, and very, very pregnant wife. She was fanning herself with a copy of What to Expect When You're Expecting, which, I noted, did not have a chapter on surviving a third trimester heatwave during a citywide blackout. "Mark," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "I've come to a decision." I recognized this tone. It was the same tone she used when she decided we were getting a dog, and the same tone she'd used when she'd decided that my collection of vintage video game consoles was less charming retro and more fire hazard chic. "I'm listening," I said, cautiously pushing myself into a sitting position. "If I have to spend one more summer pregnant and without air conditioning," she announced, her eyes locking onto mine with the intensity of a heat-seeking missile, "I'm moving into a hotel, and you're paying for it." It wasn't a threat. It was a prophecy. I saw it all flash before my eyes, my savings account dwindling, spent on room service and tiny, overpriced bottles of water. Me alone in this sweatbox, eating canned tuna and listening to the silence. That was it, the snap, the straw that broke the camel's sweaty back. My gaze fell from my wife's determined face to the tragic puddle of my former ice cream. Something had to be done. This was America, damn it. A man's home was his castle, and a castle ought to have power. "No," I said, a strange new energy surging through me. I stood up, a righteous, semi-nude warrior against the tyranny of the electrical grid. "No hotel. I have a better idea." Sarah raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Does it involve that sword you bought online?" "This is different, Sarah," I declared, pacing the living room with a newfound purpose. "This is about our future, our child's future. A future with uninterrupted Paw Patrol and frosty beverages. A future free from the whims of a power company that seems to be run by a squirrel on a rusty wheel." I grabbed my phone, which was clinging to life with 4% battery. I frantically typed "home generator" into the search bar. The screen glowed like a holy relic in the dim room. At first, I looked at the small, portable ones, the kind you use for tailgating. They were pathetic, a band-aid on a gaping wound. But then I scrolled further. I saw them, the whole house generators. Sleek, powerful boxes of metallic hope. They were magnificent. They were symbols of freedom, of self-reliance. They were the opposite of everything this powerless, sweltering moment was. "Sarah," I said, my voice dropping to a reverent whisper as I showed her a picture of a 22-kilowatt behemoth. "Behold." She peered at the screen. "It looks like an air conditioner's angry older brother. It's not just an appliance, it's a statement," I said, my imagination running wild. I saw myself, in the next blackout, standing on my porch like a benevolent king. My house would be a beacon of light and glorious refrigerated air. My neighbors, miserable in their dark hothouses, would look upon me with awe and respect. I would be the lord of the cul-de-sac, the master of my electrical domain. I'll be able to work from home. You'll have AC. The baby will be comfortable. The ice cream will remain frozen. I preached, hitting all the key points. It's an investment in our quality of life. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, fanning herself. The gentle whump 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 of the book was the only sound. "Okay," she finally said. "But if it makes a lot of noise, you're the one who has to explain it to her." She didn't have to say the name. Just the pronoun was enough to send a chill down my spine, a feat I would have thought impossible just 5 minutes prior. Her, Brenda, the president of our homeowners association, the queen of beige, the arbiter of lawn length, the ever-watchful eye of whispering pines. I gulped. This wasn't just a quest for power anymore. This was war. Before you can wage a war, you must know the terrain. In Whispering Pines, the terrain was a minefield of rules and regulations laid out in a document we all received upon closing on our homes. The Whispering Pines Homeowners Association covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It was a 3-inch thick binder, the color of sadness, and it sat on our bookshelf like a threat. I, in a moment of uncharacteristic prudence, decided I should probably consult the enemy's playbook before I dropped several $1,000s on a machine that might get me fined into oblivion. I heaved the binder off the shelf, blowing a layer of dust off the top. It landed on the coffee table with a thud that echoed the death of joy. "You're actually going to read that?" Sarah asked, looking at me as if I'd just announced I was taking up professional mime. "A smart general studies his enemy," I said, cracking open the cover. The font was a smug-looking Times New Roman. The first page was a mission statement about preserving the aesthetic harmony and property values of the community. It was the most terrifying piece of literature I'd ever encountered. For the next 2 hours, I descended into a bureaucratic hell. I learned that our trash cans could not be visible from the street for more than 12 hours. I learned that any basketball hoops had to be a pre-approved model and color. I learned that garden gnomes, while not explicitly forbidden, were strongly discouraged, as they disrupted the neighborhood's cohesive naturalistic palette. It was a masterpiece of soul-crushing legalese. I skimmed through sections on fencing, on mailboxes, on satellite dishes. My eyes were glazing over. My will to live was fading. I was about to give up and resign myself to a future of melted ice cream when I saw it. Tucked away in a subsection on property additions, nestled between rules about sheds and flagpoles, was Article 9. Section 4. Auxiliary Power Units. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The text was dense, but the gist was clear. Such units were permissible, provided they were located in the rear or side yard of the property, were fully screened from street-level view by approved fencing or landscaping, and were aesthetically integrated into the property's overall design. It didn't say a single word about noise, not one. And the phrase aesthetically integrated was so beautifully, wonderfully subjective. It was a loophole. A glorious, gaping loophole I could drive a 22-kilowatt generator through. "I found it!" I yelled, jumping up from the couch and doing a little dance. "I found the legal justification for our salvation." Sarah looked up from her phone. "Did they approve garden gnomes?" "Even better," I said, brandishing the binder like a holy text. "They approved freedom machines." I was so giddy with my discovery that I threw on a shirt and shoes and went out into my front yard, just to breathe the air of a man who had beaten the system. I was surveying my domain, my future kingdom of cool, when a shadow fell over me. A shadow accompanied by the faint scent of lavender and judgment. "Mark." I turned. There she was, Brenda, in the flesh. She was in her full HOA patrol uniform. A pastel pink polo shirt, khaki capri pants, and a white visor that seemed to defy gravity. In one hand, she held a clipboard. In the other, a tape measure. She had the posture of a drill sergeant and a haircut that looked like it had been shaped by a laser level. "Brenda," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. "Beautiful day for measuring things, I see." "I couldn't help but notice your fescue is approaching a rather boisterous length," she said, her voice a syrupy, sweet poison. She pointed the tape measure at my lawn. "We're at 3¼ inches, Mark. The bylaws clearly state a maximum of 3 inches. I've made a note of it." Of course, she had. This was a woman who probably measured the fun out of everything. Feeling bold, buoyed by my recent legal victory, I decided to go on the offensive. "Actually, Brenda, I was just telling Sarah about my new project, a whole house generator, to, enhance the serenity of our home during the next apocalyptic power outage." Brenda's smile didn't falter, but it became something sharp and dangerous. Her eyes, which were a pale, washed-out blue, narrowed into slits. She took a half-step closer. "A generator?" she said, the words dripping with condescension. "Oh, I don't think so. It's in the bylaws," I said, puffing out my chest a little. Article 9, Section 4B. As long as it's screened and aesthetically integrated, it's good to go. I'm familiar with the bylaws, Mark, she hissed, the lavender scent now feeling vaguely threatening. I helped write them, and a loud, smelly piece of industrial equipment is hardly aesthetically integrated. It's a clear violation of our noise ordinances, and it disrupts the serene character of our community. What noise ordinance? I challenged. I just read the whole thing. There's no mention of decibel levels for auxiliary power units. Brenda's reptilian smile tightened. It's implied. And as president of the board, my interpretation is the one that matters. I'll be watching, Mark. Don't even think about it. She made another note on her clipboard, a vicious little scribble, then turned on her heel and glided away, leaving me standing in my slightly too long grass. The sun suddenly felt hotter. The air felt thicker. The war had officially begun, and the first shot had been fired over a quarter-inch of grass. My interaction with Brenda had the opposite of its intended effect. Her condescending tone and vague threats didn't scare me, they galvanized me. This was no longer just about comfort, it was about principle. It was about standing up to the petty tyrants of the world, one aesthetically integrated generator at a time. My first step was to find a contractor. My first mistake was assuming this would be the easy part. I started with a popular home services website, plugging in my request and sitting back, waiting for the qualified, licensed professionals to come flocking. What I got instead was a journey into the heart of human incompetence. The first to respond was a guy I'll call No-Show Nick. His company, Nick's Electric, had 5-star reviews, all of which I now suspect were written by his mom. We scheduled an appointment for Tuesday at 10 a.m. At 10:30, I got a text. So sry man, truck probs, can we do 2? I agreed. At 2:45, another text. You won't believe this. A bird flew into my engine, lol. Tomorrow 4, sure. I blocked his number. Next up was Chad the upseller. Chad rolled up in a ridiculously oversized pickup truck with chrome everything, blasting what sounded like a blender full of angry robots. He was wearing a tight polo shirt with his company logo, Volt Brothers, stretched across his bicep. He called me bro within 10 seconds of shaking my hand. All right, bro, he said, striding into my backyard with an iPad. Let's talk power. You're not a keep the fridge running kind of guy, are you? I can tell. You're a host a rave during a hurricane kind of guy. Am I right? He showed me a quote for a generator that looked like it could power a small city. The price was equally municipal. This beast, he said, tapping the screen, has got a liquid-cooled engine, Wi-Fi connectivity, and it'll text you when it's feeling lonely. It's not just a generator, bro. It's an investment in your lifestyle. My lifestyle involves watching Netflix and maybe using the microwave, Chad, I said. I don't think I need to launch a satellite. He gave me a pitying look, as if I were a caveman who'd just discovered fire. Your call, bro, but think about the resale value. He left me with a glossy brochure and a quote that could fund a manned mission to Mars. The third contractor was the most surreal of all. His name was Mike, but I called him Mumbles Mike. He was an older gentleman who arrived in a van that looked like it had been through several wars. He didn't say hello. He just shuffled into the backyard, pointed at the spot where the generator would go, and grunted. For the next hour, he just stood there. He stared at the side of my house. He stared at the electrical panel. He stared at a squirrel on the fence. He kicked a loose rock. He sighed, a deep, world-weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of every failed electrical project in history. I tried to engage him. So, I said, think it's a straightforward job? He responded with a sound that was somewhere between a cough and a deflating tire. Got a rough estimate in mind? I tried again. He looked at me, then at the sky, then back at my house. He shrugged, a gesture of profound indifference. Then, without another word, he shuffled back to his van and drove away, leaving me in a state of utter confusion. I never heard from him again. I was losing hope. I was starting to think I'd have to learn electrical engineering on YouTube and do it myself. Sarah found me sitting on the back porch, staring at Chad's insane quote, a broken man. No luck? She asked, handing me a glass of lemonade. I've met 3 of the 4 horsemen of the contracting apocalypse, I said glumly. I think the next one is just going to set my house on fire and bill me for it. Try this guy, she said, showing me her phone. My friend from work, Jessica, Her husband used him. She said he was grumpy, but he knew what he was doing. The company was called Gus's Electric. No frills, no smiling logo, just a name and a phone number. I called, expecting the worst. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. Gus. I explained my situation, the generator, the house, the whole saga. Whispering Pines, huh? He said. Got an HOA? The mother of all HOAs, I replied. I heard him sigh on the other end of the line, the sound of a man who had stared into the abyss of petty bureaucracy many times. I'll be there tomorrow at 8. Don't be late. He hung up. The next morning, at 7:59 a.m., a clean, well-organized but decidedly old van pulled up. Gus emerged. He was a man in his late 50s with a solid build, a graying mustache, and hands that looked like they could fix a car engine with a paperclip. He nodded at me, walked straight to the backyard, and sized up the job in about 30 seconds. Yep, he said. Standard install, concrete pad, run the gas line, transfer switch next to the panel. Easy peasy. He didn't try to upsell me. He didn't mumble. He didn't call me bro. I told him about Brenda, about her threats, her interpretation of the bylaws, her obsession with my lawn. I expected him to be wary, to maybe even back out. He just grunted. An HOA president, huh? He said, pulling out a notepad and starting to sketch. I've dealt with worse. Had a guy once who thought the electrical panel was a portal to another dimension, claimed he could hear whispers from it. At least your problem is carbon-based. He scribbled down a number on the pad and handed it to me. It was reasonable, it was fair, it was beautiful. You're hired, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. Good, he said, not looking up. We'll need a city permit. That means a fire marshal inspection. You handle the HOA, I'll handle the electrons. Just tell me when to show up. Finally, a glimmer of hope. A competent human being. Now all I had to do was win a war against a woman who wielded a tape measure like a weapon. Easy peasy. Gus was a man of his word. He filed the permit application with the city the very next day. I, in turn, began my own preparations. My strategy was simple. Follow the bylaws to the absolute letter. Brenda wanted the generator screened from view. I would build it a fortress. I spent a weekend designing a small, tasteful enclosure made of the same type of wood as our deck. It would have a hinged top for access and enough ventilation to keep the machine happy. It was, if I did say so myself, the very definition of aesthetically integrated. The materials were delivered on a Monday morning. The pile of lumber sat neatly on my driveway for approximately 45 minutes before the first shot was fired. It came not as a verbal warning, but as a piece of paper, crisply folded and tucked into my front door. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the official letterhead of the Whispering Pines HOA. The letter was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive prose. It began, "It has come to our attention that construction materials have been deposited on your property." It went on to use phrases like, "We trust this is a misunderstanding. As you are surely aware," and "failure to comply will result in further action." It was a cease and desist order dressed up in a tuxedo. It was signed, in a sharp, angry script, Brenda Mae Watson, President. She's really doing it, I said to Sarah, holding the letter as if it were radioactive. What did you expect? Sarah replied, rubbing her belly. That she would bring us a welcome basket for the generator? Brenda, however, wasn't content with a paper-based offensive. She decided to call in reinforcements. That afternoon, as I was measuring cuts for the enclosure, a police car cruised slowly down our street and pulled into my driveway. My heart did a little tap dance against my ribs. It's an unnerving feeling, having the police at your house even when you know you've done nothing wrong. 2 officers got out. One was older, with a mustache that had seen things and a general air of being 5 minutes from retirement. The other looked like he'd just graduated from the academy yesterday, all bright-eyed and eager. I immediately dubbed them Officer Miller and Officer Skippy. Brenda was already marching across her lawn, clipboard in hand, ready to present her case. "Officers, thank you for coming," she said, pointing a trembling finger at my pile of wood. "This man is engaging in unauthorized construction. It's a clear violation, and he has refused to stop." I decided to play it cool. I put on my best, "Who me?" face and strolled over, wiping sawdust on my shorts. "Afternoon, officers," I said, giving them a friendly nod. "Is there a problem?" Officer Miller, the veteran, looked from the wood, to me, to Brenda. His eyes radiated a profound sense of weariness. "Ma'am," he said to Brenda, "what exactly is the issue here?" "He's building an illegal structure," she insisted. "He's thumbing his nose at the entire community." Officer Skippy, meanwhile, was looking at my plans, which were laid out on the driveway. "Is that for a generator enclosure?" "Sweet, my dad has one of those. Comes in super handy during storms." I seized the opening. "That's exactly what it is, officer," I said, turning on the charm. "Just trying to be prepared. For my pregnant wife, you know." I gestured towards the house, where Sarah was now standing in the doorway, looking angelic and vulnerable. It was a shameless move, and it worked perfectly. "I'm just following the HOA bylaws," I continued, pulling out my own copy, the auxiliary power units section highlighted in bright yellow. "It says the unit has to be screened from view. That's all I'm doing, building a screen." I handed the page to Officer Miller. He read it, his mustache twitching slightly. He then looked at Brenda, who was practically vibrating with indignation. "So you called us? Because he's following the rules?" Miller asked, his voice flat. "It's the principle of the thing," Brenda sputtered. "He's doing it to spite me." "Ma'am, with all due respect," Officer Miller said, handing the paper back to me, "we have actual crimes to deal with. This is a civil matter. It's between you, him, and your little club. Unless his lumber starts robbing banks, this is not a police issue." Officer Skippy gave me a thumbs up. "Looks like a cool project, man. Make sure you use galvanized screws." They got back in their car, leaving me and Brenda in a silent standoff on my driveway. She gave me a look that could strip paint, a look that promised this was far from over. I gave her a small, polite wave. As the police car pulled away, I felt a surge of triumph. I had won the battle. But as I looked at Brenda's retreating form, her back ramrod straight with fury, I knew the war was about to enter a much, much uglier phase. She wasn't just going to fight me with letters anymore. She was going to try and burn my whole operation to the ground. The victory over the police call was short-lived. It was like winning a single hand of poker against a card sharp who owned the casino. I knew Brenda's next move would be more strategic, more insidious. Gus called me the following day. "Good news and bad news," he said in his usual monotone. "Good news is, the city processed the permit application. Bad news is, they scheduled the fire marshal inspection for next Tuesday." My stomach dropped. "Next Tuesday? That's a week away." "Yep, and a guy named Henderson is doing it. He's a stickler. By the book all the way. Everything's got to be perfect." This was the final hurdle, the championship match. The fire marshal's signature was the key to the whole kingdom. Without it, the generator was just a very expensive, very heavy lawn ornament. And I knew, with the certainty of a man who has stared into the heart of a true HOA Karen, that Brenda would be all over this. She would be calling the city, filing complaints, probably claiming my generator was a national security threat. She would do everything in her power to stop that signature from ever touching that piece of paper. I spent that evening in a state of high anxiety, pacing my living room while Sarah tried to calm me down. "Just make sure everything is perfect, like Gus said," she reasoned. "If it's all up to code, what can she do?" "You underestimate her," I said, stopping my pacing to look out the window, half expecting to see Brenda hiding in my bushes with night vision goggles. "She's not bound by logic or reason. She operates on pure, uncut spite. She'll tell the fire marshal it runs on kitten souls and leaks pure poison. And the worst part is, she's so convincing in her unhinged fury that he might just believe her." I was trapped. If Brenda was there for the inspection, she'd create a scene. She'd sow doubt in Henderson's mind. There had to be a way to get the permit signed without her interference. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was scrolling through the city's website, looking at permit regulations, when I had the idea. It arrived not like a gentle dawn, but like a bolt of lightning to the brain. It was audacious. It was unethical. It was probably several kinds of illegal. And it was absolutely perfect. The plan began to form in the dark, fevered corners of my mind. It was a multi-stage operation that relied on timing, deception, and a little bit of acting. The next morning, I did some reconnaissance. I drove past Brenda's house, a casual loop around the cul-de-sac. Her car was gone. I called Sarah. "Operation Brenda Watch is a go," I said, trying to sound like a spy. "Can you do me a favor? Call Jessica. Ask her what she knows about Brenda's weekly routine." Sarah sighed. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" "Immensely," I admitted. An hour later, I had the intel. From Jessica, who got it from her friend who was in Brenda's book club, purely for the neighborhood gossip, I learned that Brenda had a standing appointment every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. at the Curl and Dye Hair Salon. It was a sacred ritual. After that, she had lunch with her two cronies, two other women from the HOA board who I privately called Heckle and Jekyll. She was reliably out of the neighborhood from 10 a.m. until at least 1 p.m. The inspection was scheduled for 11 a.m. The window of opportunity was there. It was perfect. I called Gus immediately. Gus, it's Mark. I have a plan. I laid it all out for him. The timing, the deception, the sheer glorious insanity of it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You're going to what now? Gus finally said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration. You want to lie to a fire marshal? A city official? Do you have a death wish, kid? It's not a lie, Gus, I argued, trying to convince myself as much as him. It's a proactive assumption of consent. A verbal sleight of hand. Think of me as a magician, and Brenda is the rabbit I'm about to pull out of a hat she doesn't know she's wearing. Magicians end up in jail when they commit fraud, Mark. What's the worst that could happen? I asked, a phrase that has surely preceded countless disasters. Jail, Gus said flatly. Fines. Me losing my license because I was an accessory. A fire because the distracted marshal missed something. You want me to continue? Okay, bad question, I conceded. But look, it's the only way. You just focus on the electrons. Let me handle the human element. Just play along, please, for the sake of all that is air-conditioned. I heard him let out a long, slow sigh. It was the sound of a man who knew he was about to do something against his better judgment. Fine, he grumbled, but if we end up in a holding cell together, you're buying me dinner. The plan was in motion. The die was cast. Now I just had to put on the performance of a lifetime. The morning of the inspection, I was a nervous wreck. I'd been up since dawn, sweeping the driveway, arranging the tools neatly, and giving the new generator enclosure a final coat of stain. I even put a small, inoffensive potted fern next to it, a desperate nod to aesthetic integration. Sarah watched me from the kitchen window, shaking her head and laughing. You're nesting more than I am, she called out. This isn't nesting, I shot back, adjusting the fern by half an inch. This is tactical beautification. At exactly 10:05 a.m., I saw Brenda's minivan back out of her driveway and head down the street. Phase 1 was complete. The target was on the move. I had a clear window. Gus arrived at 10:30, his face set in a stony mask of disapproval. You still sure about this, kid? He asked, unloading a toolbox. Never been more sure of anything in my life, Gus. I lied. At 11:00 a.m. on the dot, a white city-owned sedan pulled up. Out stepped a man who looked like he'd been born with a clipboard in his hand and a frown on his face. He had a crisp uniform, shiny shoes, and the weary eyes of a man who spends his days telling people their dreams are a fire hazard. This had to be Mr. Henderson. It was showtime. I switched gears, transforming from a nervous wreck into the character I'd been rehearsing all morning. Charming, slightly hapless husband. Mr. Henderson! I called out, striding over with a warm, welcoming smile. Mark Johnson, thanks so much for coming out. Can I get you something? A cold water? A coffee? My wife just made a fresh batch of chocolate chip cookies, if you're interested. She's the best. Henderson gave me a curt nod, his eyes already scanning the property, looking for violations. Let's just see the installation, Mr. Johnson. Of course, right this way. I led him to the backyard, where Gus was waiting. I could feel Henderson's critical gaze on every detail. He walked around the generator, inspecting Gus's handiwork. He opened the enclosure. He checked the clearance from the house. He examined the gas line connection and the wiring leading to the transfer switch by the main panel. Gus, to his credit, was a true artist. Everything was perfect. The wiring was immaculate, the connections were solid, every screw was tight, every label was clear. It was a textbook installation. I saw a flicker of something in Henderson's eyes. It might have been respect. He grunted, making notes on his clipboard. Installation looks clean, he conceded. Everything appears to be up to code. My heart soared. This was it, the final moment. He pulled out a pen, ready to sign the permit form. I took a deep breath. steadied my nerves, and delivered the line I had practiced in front of the bathroom mirror a dozen times. I made it sound casual, offhand, like a man making idle chit-chat. You know, I began with a little chuckle, I'm just so relieved we're finally getting this done. My wife, Brenda, she's the HOA president, you know. I let that little nugget of information hang in the air for a second. Henderson's pen paused. I continued, layering it on thick. She was so insistent we get this taken care of before the baby comes. I gestured vaguely toward the house. She actually signed off on the plans in my name last week, just to speed things up with the city. She's a real stickler for the rules, but she said this was too important to get bogged down in paperwork. I delivered the final, brilliant stroke. She'd be here to thank you herself, but, you know, Tuesday is her hair day. It's a whole thing. You know how it is. I gave him a conspiratorial, man-to-man smile, as if we were both members of a secret club of husbands who understood the mysterious and unchangeable rituals of our wives. Henderson looked at me, then at the flawless installation, then back at me. He was a busy man, a by-the-book man, and he had just been handed a perfectly logical, perfectly reasonable explanation that would prevent any future headaches. He had a clean install, and, as far as he was concerned, the verbal green light from the head of the HOA herself. Why would he dig any deeper? He bought it, hook, line, and sinker. All right then, he said, and with a decisive flick of his wrist, he scribbled his signature on the permit. He pushed the clipboard towards me. My eyes darted to the box labeled HOA approval. There, in neat, official print, Henderson had written, verbal approval from HOA president, Brenda, via husband. I could have cried. It was the most beautiful sentence I had ever read. I thanked him profusely, offered him cookies again. He declined, and shook his hand with genuine gratitude. Gus walked him to his car, and I stood in my backyard, holding the signed permit like it was the Declaration of Independence. I had done it. I had pulled off the single most audacious, ridiculous, and satisfying deception of my entire life. The generator was legal. It was official. It was mine. And Brenda had no idea she had just personally signed off on her own defeat. The 2 weeks following the inspection were the calm before the storm. Literally. Gus and his team finished the final connections, we tested the system, and the beautiful, powerful machine sat silently in its aesthetically integrated enclosure, waiting for its moment to shine. I felt like a kid at Christmas, constantly checking the weather forecast, hoping for a thunderstorm. Sarah thought I was insane. You're the only person in the world actively rooting for a power outage, she said one evening. I'm not rooting for an outage, I corrected her. I'm rooting for a triumphant validation of my efforts. My validation arrived on a sweltering Friday night. The sky turned a bruised purple, the wind picked up, and the heavens opened. It was a classic summer gully washer. We were in the middle of watching a movie when the lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging us into darkness and a sudden, profound silence. The only sound was the drumming of rain on the roof. I didn't even flinch. I just smiled. Showtime, I whispered. I walked over to the transfer switch Gus had installed in the utility room. With a sense of theatrical flourish that the moment absolutely demanded, I flipped the switch. There was a low rumble from outside, and then a smooth, steady hum. The lights flickered back to life. The air conditioner kicked on with a glorious whoosh. The movie resumed on the TV. It was seamless. It was magical. It was everything I had dreamed of. I went to the back window and looked out. My house was an island of light and order in a sea of darkness. Every other house on the cul-de-sac was blacked out. It was a beautiful sight. Then I looked across the street. A light was bobbing in Brenda's living room window, a flashlight, and it was moving with an angry, jerky energy. The front door was flung open, and a figure emerged, silhouetted against the dark house. It was Brenda, and she was wearing a raincoat over her pajamas. She looked like a deranged mushroom. She saw my house, glowing like a beacon, and she began to march across the street, her face a mask of pure fury. "Oh, this is going to be good," I said, grabbing the signed permit from the kitchen counter and heading for the front door. "Mark, don't," Sarah warned. "Just ignore her." "Ignore her?" "Sarah, my love, this is the victory lap. This is the moment the hero gets to monologue. I've been practicing." I opened the door just as Brenda reached my front porch, her hair plastered to her head by the rain. "What is that noise?" she shrieked over the storm, her voice cracking with rage. "I knew it! You went behind my back! You are in violation! I will have you fined! I will have you arrested!" I held up a hand, a picture of serene calm. Brenda, please. You'll wake the neighbors." A few lights were already flicking on next door as people peeked out their windows, drawn by the commotion. "It's all perfectly legal," I said, my voice smooth as butter. I held out the permit, protected from the rain by a plastic sleeve I had prepared for this very occasion. "See for yourself." She snatched it from my hand. Her flashlight beam danced over the paper. I saw her eyes find the signature from the fire marshal. Then I saw them find the real prize, the beautiful line of text at the bottom. I watched her read it once, then twice. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her face, illuminated by the shaky flashlight, was a spectacular canvas of confusion, rage, and the dawning horror of a woman who knows she has been completely and utterly outplayed. I decided to help her along. "I have to say, Brenda, it was very thoughtful of you to give your approval," I said, my voice dripping with false sincerity. "Saved me a lot of paperwork. The fire marshal was very impressed with your efficiency." She looked from the paper, to my face, to the permit again. She understood. The lie, the hair appointment, the time and jit all clicked into place in her mind. She knew she had been tricked, but the evidence was right there in her hand on an official city document. What could she say? He lied to the fire marshal about me approving it while I was getting my roots done? It was checkmate. Her face turned a shade of red. I had previously only seen in cartoons. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She crumpled the plastic sleeve in her fist, threw it onto my porch, and let out a strangled scream of pure frustration. Without another word, she turned and stomped back across the street, her wet pajamas flapping in the wind. My neighbors, who had witnessed the entire exchange from their dark windows, were speechless. I stood on my porch, the rain washing over me, the steady hum of my generator, a symphony of victory in the background. I had done it. I had faced the dragon in its lair, and I had won. The story of the fire marshal's signature spread through Whispering Pines faster than a gossip column in a small town. The next morning, as crews worked to restore power, my phone buzzed incessantly. It was my next-door neighbor, Dave, a mild-mannered accountant who had suffered under Brenda's reign for years. "Dude," he said, his voice full of awe, "my wife saw the whole thing. Is it true? Did you really get her to sign off on it?" "Let's just say I facilitated her approval," I said with a grin. By noon, I was a local folk hero. People I barely knew were giving me thumbs up as they drove by. The legend grew with each telling. In some versions, I had hypnotized the fire marshal. In others, I had blackmailed Brenda with photographic evidence of her having a gnome in her backyard. The truth was somehow even more satisfying. Brenda's authority, which was built on a foundation of fear and nitpicking, crumbled overnight. She was a joke. The woman who could levy a fine for a slightly too tall blade of grass had been publicly humiliated. She didn't show her face for weeks. Her minivan remained parked in her garage. Her clipboard, presumably, gathered dust. At the next quarterly HOA meeting, held in the community clubhouse, the atmosphere was different. It was electric. Brenda, who had to be there as president, sat at the head table looking pale and defeated. When the floor was opened for new business, Dave stood up. "I'd like to make a motion," he said, his voice shaking slightly but full of resolve. "I think it's time for a change in leadership. I nominate Mark Johnson for president of the HOA." A wave of applause filled the room. I was stunned. I stood up, flattered but horrified. I wanted to fight the power, not become it. "Dave, I appreciate that," I said, addressing the room. "But I'm not the man for the job. My work here is done. A leader shouldn't be a warrior. A leader should be a gardener. Someone who helps things grow, not someone who's constantly fighting battles." My eyes flickered towards Brenda, who sank lower in her chair. "That's why," I continued, "I think the perfect person for the job is Dave. He's fair, he's reasonable, and I've seen his hydrangeas. The man knows what he's doing." And that's how Dave, the quiet accountant, was elected HOA president in a landslide vote. Brenda didn't even run. Her reign of terror was officially over. Dave's first act was to propose a motion to review the bylaws for common sense amendments. The era of beige tyranny was at an end. A few months later, Sarah gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, Lily. Life settled into a new, chaotic, wonderful rhythm. One evening, as I was rocking Lily to sleep in her nursery, The lights flickered and died. Another power outage. But this time, there was no panic, no dread. A few seconds later, the familiar, gentle hum of the generator kicked in. The nightlight came back on, casting a soft glow on my daughter's face. I looked out the window. The street was dark, but here and there, I saw the bobbing lights of flashlights. I saw Dave, the new HOA president, wheeling a small, portable generator out of his garage to help an elderly neighbor. The neighborhood felt different. It felt friendlier. Sarah came and stood next to me, wrapping an arm around my waist. "You're smiling," she said. "You really do love that generator." "It's not about the generator anymore," I said, looking down at Lily sleeping peacefully in my arms. "Not really." I thought back to the heat, the melted ice cream, the absurd fight over a few inches of grass. It seemed like a lifetime ago. I pulled my wife and daughter close, bathed in the steady, reliable glow of our own private power station. "And that, my dear," I whispered to Lily, who slept on, oblivious, "is the story of how a little bit of sarcasm and a well-timed lie to a public official brought peace and air conditioning to our little corner of the world, the moral of the story? Sometimes you have to fight fire with a generator signed off in your name." Sarah rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Outside, the gentle hum was the only sound. It was the sound of a battle won. It was the sound of coming home. It was the sound of victory.